In the spring of 1943, beneath the bustling streets of wartime London, a group of British intelligence officers gathered around an ordinary desk to execute one of the most audacious plans in military history. Their weapon was not a gun, not a bomb, not a fleet of aircraft. It was a dead, homeless man. What they were about to unleash would deceive Adolf Hitler himself, redirect entire German armies, and ultimately save thousands of Allied lives. This is the story of Operation Mincemeat, a deception so brilliant, so meticulously crafted, that it reads like fiction. Yet every word is true. Picture this. You're planning the largest amphibious invasion in history up to that point. Your target is obvious to everyone, including the enemy. Your soldiers are about to storm beaches that will be crawling with machine guns, artillery, and thousands of enemy troops waiting to cut them down. The only way to save your men is to convince your enemy that you're attacking somewhere else entirely. But how do you fool the most paranoid dictator in history? How do you make Hitler himself believe a lie so completely that he moves entire divisions to defend the wrong place? The answer lay in the brilliant mind of Ian Fleming, yes, the future creator of James Bond, and a small team of intelligence officers who understood something fundamental about human psychology. People believe what they discover for themselves far more than what they're told. So instead of trying to plant false information through spies or radio intercepts, they would let the Germans find their own intelligence. They would create a dead man who would tell the most convincing lie of World War II. But this wasn't just any deception. This was a masterpiece of human engineering that required them to build an entire fictional life, complete with love letters, bills, theater tickets, and even an overdraft at the bank. They had to think like novelists, like method actors, like forensic experts all at the same time. Because if the Germans discovered even one flaw in their creation, thousands of Allied soldiers would die on the beaches of Sicily. The stage was set in early 1943, as the desert sands of North Africa finally witnessed Allied victory. British and American forces had crushed Rommel's Afrika Korps, and suddenly the Mediterranean lay open before them like an invitation. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt, meeting at the Casablanca Conference in January, faced a critical decision. Where would they strike next at the soft underbelly of Europe? The answer was painfully obvious. Sicily. The island sat like a football at the toe of Italy, perfectly positioned for launching further operations into the heart of Axis territory. Its airfields would provide crucial bases for bombing runs. Its ports would supply future campaigns. Every military strategist in the world could see it coming from 1,000 miles away. And that was precisely the problem. German and Italian commanders weren't blind. They knew Sicily was the logical target, and they were already pouring reinforcements onto the island. Machine gun nests sprouted along the beaches like deadly flowers. Artillery positions crowned every hill. The approaches to the island bristled with coastal guns and naval mines. What should have been a stepping stone to victory threatened to become a slaughter pen for Allied forces. The mathematics of invasion were brutally simple. The defenders would know exactly when and where the Allies were coming. They would be dug in, supplied, and ready. The attackers would have to cross miles of open water, then charge up defended beaches under withering fire. Even with their superior numbers and equipment, the Allies faced the prospect of catastrophic casualties, unless they could somehow convince the Germans to look the other way. This was where the peculiar genius of British intelligence came into play. In September 1939, even before the war had truly begun, Admiral John Godfrey and his assistant Ian Fleming had written what they called the Trout Memo. The document compared wartime deception to fly fishing, outlining 54 different schemes for luring the enemy into traps. Buried in this list was idea number 28. Drop a dead body loaded with fake documents behind enemy lines and let the enemy discover it themselves. Fleming's original concept was elegant in its simplicity. People are naturally suspicious of information that's obviously planted, but they trust intelligence they believe they've stolen. A captured courier, a downed aircraft, a body washed ashore. These scenarios felt authentic because they happened in war. The enemy would examine such discoveries with the keen attention of treasure hunters, never suspecting they were being fed exactly what their opponents wanted them to believe. For years, the idea remained just that, an idea gathering dust in intelligence files. But by early 1943, As the Sicily problem loomed larger, two brilliant officers dusted off Fleming's concept and began to transform it into reality. Lieutenant Commander Ewen Montagu of Naval Intelligence and Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of the Royal Air Force became the unlikely masterminds of what would become the most successful military deception of the war. Montagu brought a unique perspective to the project. Coming from a prominent Jewish family, he harbored a deeply personal hatred for Hitler and everything the Nazi regime represented. Later, he would describe the particular satisfaction he felt in knowing that he had directly and specifically fooled that monster. But personal motivation alone wouldn't be enough. The operation would require meticulous planning, unprecedented attention to detail, and a corpse. Finding the right body proved far more challenging than anyone anticipated. They couldn't simply grab any corpse from a morgue. The body needed to be fresh enough to appear recently drowned, yet old enough that any forensic examination wouldn't reveal suspicious details. It needed to be the right age, the right build, and most crucially, it needed to belong to someone with no family or friends who might ask awkward questions. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the leading pathologist of the day, joined their search for the perfect corpse. For weeks, they scoured morgues and hospitals across London, looking for their star performer. The requirement seemed impossible to meet. Then, in a warehouse near King's Cross Station, they found him. Glyndwr Michael had lived a life that nobody would remember. Born in the Welsh valleys, he drifted to London after losing both parents, surviving on the streets with no money, no friends, and no prospects. His final act was to consume rat poison, whether by accident or design, nobody would ever know. The phosphorus in the poison reacted with his stomach acids, producing a slow, agonizing death that left his body in exactly the condition the intelligence officers needed. Here was their leading man, a 34-year-old vagrant whose death would serve his country in ways his life never could. But Glyndwr Michael was about to be reborn as someone entirely different. Someone with a name, a rank, a personality, and most importantly, a briefcase full of secrets that would change the course of history. The transformation would be extraordinary. They weren't just creating a false identity, they were building a complete human being from scratch. Major William Martin of the Royal Marines would need a past, a present, and tragically, no future. He would need love letters from a fiancée, bills from his tailor, theatre tickets from his last night in London. Every detail had to be perfect because German intelligence officers would examine every fibre, every crease, every smudge on every document. What happened next would test the limits of human creativity and deception as a team of British intelligence officers worked to create the most convincing lie ever told. The creation of Major William Martin began with a single photograph. In the basement offices of British intelligence, a young woman named Jean Gerard sat for what would become one of the most important portraits of World War II. Gerard worked as a clerk for MI5, but her face would soon grace the wallet of a dead man, transforming her into Pam, the fictional fiancée whose love letters would help sell the greatest lie ever told. But a photograph wasn't enough. Love leaves traces, and German intelligence officers were trained to spot forgeries. So the team did something unprecedented in the history of espionage. They fell in love on behalf of a dead man. Sitting around their desks in the dim light of wartime London, hardened intelligence officers crafted passionate love letters in feminine handwriting, pouring genuine emotion onto paper that would be soaked in seawater and examined under German microscopes. The letters spoke of stolen moments, of promises made and dreams shared. They referenced inside jokes that only lovers would understand, mentioned mutual friends who existed only in the imagination of their creators. One letter playfully scolded Martin for his terrible habit of losing his keys, a detail so mundane, so perfectly human, that no forger would think to include it. Yet these were exactly the touches that would convince enemy agents they were reading genuine correspondence. Meanwhile, other team members became method actors in the theatre of deception. They wore Martin's uniform for weeks, ensuring it carried the natural wear patterns of a serving officer. They scuffed his shoes on London pavements, frayed his shirt cuffs with careful use, even created a convincing overdraft at his bank. Every aspect of Martin's existence had to feel lived in, authentic, real. The attention to detail bordered on obsession, They purchased expensive underwear and wore it themselves to give it that authentic used appearance. They aged his identity documents with careful exposure to light and moisture. They even created a father for Martin, complete with a stern letter about outstanding debts and family obligations. The fictional major wasn't just a name on a corpse. He was a fully realized human being with relationships, responsibilities, and flaws. But the crown jewel of their creation lay in the documents Martin would carry. These weren't just random military papers. They were carefully crafted intelligence designed to exploit Hitler's own paranoia and strategic thinking. The masterpiece was a personal letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye to General Sir Harold Alexander, written in the casual tone of old friends discussing sensitive military matters. The letter's genius lay in its use of reverse psychology. Rather than simply claiming the Allies would attack Greece, Nye wrote that they stood a very good chance of making the Germans think they would go for Sicily, since it was an obvious objective about which the enemy must be nervous. This was deception within deception, a lie wrapped in truth that played directly into German assumptions about Allied strategic thinking. The second key document introduced Martin as an expert in amphibious warfare, being sent to study landing techniques for future operations. It referenced the recent disaster at Dieppe, lending credibility through acknowledged failure, and made subtle jokes about sardines that would plant the seed of Sardinia in German minds. Every word was chosen to feel authentic, while guiding enemy thinking toward exactly the wrong conclusions. With their fictional major complete and his documents prepared, the team faced their final challenge, delivering their creation to the enemy without arousing suspicion. They needed a location where German intelligence operated freely, where local officials might be sympathetic to Nazi interests, and where ocean currents would believably deliver a body from a crashed aircraft. The answer was Huelva, a Spanish port city on the Atlantic coast. Spain remained officially neutral in the war, but its military leaders harbored strong pro-German sympathies. More importantly, Huelva hosted both a German consulate and an Abwehr intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover. The local currents were perfect for their purposes, strong enough to push a body ashore but gentle enough to preserve the documents it carried. On April 19th, 1943, the body of Glyndwr Michael, now transformed into Major William Martin, was loaded aboard HMS Seraph, a British submarine commanded by Lieutenant Bill Jewell. The corpse traveled in a specially designed steel canister, packed with dry ice to preserve it during the journey to Spanish waters. For 3 months, the homeless Welshman had waited in a London morgue. Now he was about to take the stage in the greatest performance of his life. The submarine slipped through the dark waters of the Bay of Biscay, carrying its unusual cargo toward destiny. Lieutenant Jewell and his crew knew they were participating in something extraordinary, though the full details remained classified. As they approached the Spanish coast, tension filled the submarine's cramped compartments. Everything depended on the next few hours. In the pre-dawn darkness of April 30th, HMS Seraph surfaced off the coast of Huelva. The crew carefully removed the canister containing Major Martin's body and prepared for the final act of their deception. They dressed the corpse in a life jacket, attached his briefcase securely to his wrist, and checked every detail one last time. Then, with surprising gentleness, they lowered the body of the man who had never mattered in life into waters where he would change history in death. Lieutenant Jewell sent a coded message back to London. Mincemeat complete. The die was cast. Within hours, Spanish fishermen would discover the body of a British officer carrying secrets that would redirect the course of World War II. But first, those documents had to find their way into German hands, and the enemy had to believe what they read. The morning sun rose over Huelva as local fishermen hauled in their nets, expecting nothing more than the day's catch. Instead, they found themselves players in a drama whose scope they could never imagine. The body floating in their nets wore the uniform of a British major, his briefcase still attached, his documents still sealed. Within hours, Spanish authorities would examine the mysterious corpse, and the greatest deception in military history would begin its final, crucial phase. The Spanish authorities who first examined Major Martin's waterlogged corpse had no idea they were handling dynamite. To them, he was simply another casualty of war, a British officer whose aircraft had presumably crashed into the unforgiving Atlantic. The local coroner, exactly as the Mincemeat team had hoped, was not sophisticated enough to detect the elaborate deception. He saw what they wanted him to see: a recently drowned Royal Marines officer carrying classified documents that had somehow survived his watery grave. But the real target wasn't the Spanish coroner. It was the German intelligence network that operated like a spider's web throughout supposedly neutral Spain. Within hours of the body's discovery, whispers began flowing through the shadow channels of espionage. A British officer, carrying papers, documents that might reveal Allied intentions in the Mediterranean. The bait was in the water, and the fish were already circling. The Spanish military commander in Huelva, Colonel Alfonso Moreno, was precisely the kind of man the British had counted on finding. Pro-German in his sympathies, ambitious in his outlook, and eager to prove his worth to his Nazi contacts, Moreno saw opportunity in the waterlogged briefcase chained to the dead major's wrist. He ordered photographs made of every document before officially handing them back to British authorities, a decision that would echo through history. Those photographs traveled fast, from Huelva to Madrid. From Madrid to Berlin, the copies of Martin's documents raced through German intelligence channels like wildfire. Each handler who examined them saw exactly what the Mincemeat team had intended: authentic British military correspondence discussing invasion plans for Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily mentioned only as a diversionary target to fool German defenders. The documents reached the desk of Colonel Alexis Baron von Roenne, head of German military intelligence's Foreign Armies West section. Von Roenne was no amateur. He'd built his reputation on careful analysis and healthy skepticism about enemy intelligence. But as he studied the Martin papers under the harsh light of his Berlin office, he saw no reason for suspicion. The documents felt real because they were real, in every way except the information they contained. The letters bore authentic letterheads, genuine signatures, and the kind of mundane personal details that forgers rarely bothered to include. Nye's casual mention of appointing a new commander for the Guards Brigade, his discussion of American service medals for British officers, these were the touches that convinced von Roenne he was reading stolen Allied secrets rather than planted deception. The psychological trap was perfect, and Germany's top intelligence analyst walked straight into it. Von Roenne's analysis traveled upward, through the Nazi command structure, gaining credibility with each endorsement. By early May, the Martin documents had reached the highest levels of German leadership. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German Navy, examined them personally. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Armed Forces High Command, added his assessment. Each senior officer who reviewed the intelligence reached the same conclusion. The Allies were planning to invade Greece and Sardinia, using Sicily as a feint. But the ultimate judge sat in his fortified compound outside Berlin, surrounded by maps and haunted by the growing pressure of fighting a war on multiple fronts. Adolf Hitler had built his empire on intuition as much as military force, and his paranoid mind was perfectly calibrated to believe the Martin deception. When the documents finally reached his desk, they confirmed his own strategic instincts about Allied intentions in the Mediterranean. Hitler's reaction exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of the Mincemeat team. On May 14th, in a meeting with Admiral Dönitz that would be recorded in the German war diary, the Führer declared with absolute certainty that Sicily was not the next Allied landing. Greece and Sardinia must be reinforced immediately. The discovered Anglo-Saxon order, he proclaimed, confirmed his assumption that the planned attack would be directed mainly against Sardinia and the Peloponnese. The speed of Hitler's response was breathtaking. Within days, German divisions began moving across Europe like pieces on a vast chessboard. The elite 1st Panzer Division, battle-hardened veterans who could have made the difference in Sicily, rolled out of France toward Greece. 7 infantry divisions departed Italy for the Balkans. Aircraft squadrons repositioned to Sardinian airfields. Naval units shifted from Sicily to Greek waters. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park watched this massive redeployment with amazement and growing excitement. Through their interception of German communications, they could track the success of Operation Mincemeat in real time. Encrypted messages flew between German headquarters as commanders scrambled to redeploy forces, according to Hitler's new strategic vision. The phantom threat created by a dead homeless man was reshaping the entire German defensive posture in the Mediterranean. The psychological impact on German planning was even more profound than the physical troop movements. Hitler's conviction that Greece remained the primary target created a cascade of defensive preparations that stretched German resources to their breaking point. Coastal fortifications sprouted along Greek beaches. Supply lines extended across the Balkans to support forces that were defending against an invasion that would never come. Meanwhile, Sicily, the actual target of Allied invasion plans, found itself increasingly stripped of defenders. The German and Italian units that remained on the island watched nervously as their reinforcements departed for other theaters. Local commanders sent increasingly urgent requests for additional troops, only to be told that the real threat lay elsewhere. The mincemeat deception was working exactly as intended, but the true test still lay ahead. As June gave way to July, Allied invasion fleets began assembling in North African ports. Thousands of ships loaded with men, tanks, artillery, and supplies prepared for the largest amphibious operation yet attempted in the Mediterranean. The soldiers boarding those vessels had no idea that their chances of survival had been dramatically improved by the posthumous service of a man whose name they would never know. The irony was perfect. Glyndwr Michael, who had lived his entire life unnoticed and unmourned, was about to save thousands of lives through his death. The homeless vagrant from Wales had become, in the most literal sense possible, a war hero. His sacrifice would be measured not in the enemy soldiers he killed, but in the Allied soldiers who would live because German defenders were looking the other way. But Operation Mincemeat's greatest triumph still lay ahead. When the first Allied troops stormed ashore at Sicily, they would discover beaches far less defended than anyone had dared hope. The machine gun nests were there, the artillery positions remained, but the massive reinforcements that should have made the invasion a bloodbath were hundreds of miles away, guarding against phantom armies that existed only in Hitler's deceived imagination. The stage was set for vindication on a scale that even the mincemeat team had hardly dared imagine. Their elaborate deception was about to be tested in the crucible of actual combat, where success would be measured in lives saved and strategic objectives achieved. The greatest lie ever told was about to collide with the brutal reality of war. The morning of July 9th, 1943, dawned clear over the Mediterranean as the largest invasion fleet in history began its approach to Sicily. Aboard hundreds of ships, Allied soldiers checked their equipment one final time, many writing what they believed might be their last letters home. They had trained for months, studying maps of beaches they expected to be crawling with German machine guns and Italian artillery. What they didn't know was that a dead man had already fought their first battle for them. Operation Husky, as the Sicily invasion was codenamed, represented everything the Allies had learned about amphibious warfare since the disasters of Gallipoli and Dieppe. Montgomery's 8th Army would strike the southeastern coast while Patton's 7th Army hit the south. The plan was sound, the forces were ready, but everyone from Churchill to the lowliest private knew that success would come at a terrible price. Or so they thought. As the first landing craft hit the beaches near Syracuse and Gela, something extraordinary happened. The murderous crossfire that Allied planners had anticipated simply wasn't there. German resistance was fierce but scattered, lacking the concentrated firepower that should have turned the surf red with blood. Italian coastal divisions fought bravely, but found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. The reinforcements that should have been rushing to support them were hundreds of miles away, defending beaches in Greece that would never see an Allied soldier. The reports flowing back to Allied headquarters defied belief. Casualties were running at 1/7 the projected rate. Ships that commanders expected to lose by the hundreds remained afloat. Beaches that should have become killing fields were secured within hours rather than days. Something had gone very, very right, and the reason lay in a briefcase that had washed ashore 2 months earlier. Even as Allied forces poured onto Sicilian beaches, Hitler remained convinced that the real blow would fall elsewhere. German signals intercepted by Bletchley Park revealed the stunning success of the mincemeat deception. 4 hours after the Sicily landings began, German aircraft were still being transferred from Sicily to Sardinia. The Führer's paranoid certainty that Greece remained the primary target had created a strategic blind spot that Allied forces were exploiting to devastating effect. The speed of the Sicilian campaign shattered every prediction. What military planners had estimated would take 3 months was accomplished in just 38 days. City after city fell to the advancing Allies as German and Italian defenders found themselves fighting without the reserves they desperately needed. The phantom divisions defending Greece against imaginary invasions might as well have been on the moon for all the good they did Sicily's actual defenders. The fall of Sicily triggered a cascade that would reshape the entire war. Mussolini's government crumbled, Italy surrendered, and Hitler found himself defending a second front he'd never wanted to open. The homeless man from Wales had achieved what entire armies struggled to accomplish. Operation Mincemeat stands as proof that in war, the greatest victories sometimes come not from the strongest weapons, but from the most creative minds. A single lie, told with perfect conviction, had fooled the most paranoid dictator in history and saved thousands of lives in the process.